Good morning. And for any of you guys who haven't been to my channel before, first off, welcome. But secondly, I need to tell you that I've been going on about a particular subject for some time now. And the subject is gambling in video games, and specifically loot boxes. Now, I mentioned in a couple of my videos that there has been a petition issued in the UK to the UK government to try and get this issue looked at. And I'll put a link in the description for that petition. So if any of you guys want to sign it and you're in the UK, feel free to do so. That would help no end. Now, I'm going to read what the petition says in a minute, but this video is actually about the response from the government because we've now reached enough signatures that the government have responded. But this is what the initial petition says. And its title is Adapt Gambling Laws to Include Gambling in Video Games Which Target Children. And it says, many video games companies in recent years have introduced mechanics which are essentially gambling, of which are targeted at children and vulnerable adults. While not currently considered gambling by law, they do copy many traits to make them as addictive and can lead to real money being earned or lost. And then it says more details. Gambling in video games mostly involve loot boxes, where players use virtual currency, often bought with real money, to earn in-game items, often worth less than what they paid, sometimes more, hence it's gambling. Currently, only China has introduced new laws to force companies to display the odds of winning, which had been standard in the UK gambling industry for years. So that's something that perhaps should be applied straight away because obviously we've had it for years. But there's an issue as to whether it's gambling. We won't get into that specifically right away. Let's have a look at what the government have said. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through what the government have said in their response, and then I'm going to actually make some comments as I go along. So first off, this is what they have to say. The Gambling Commission has strong powers to regulate gambling and is monitoring convergence between gambling and video games closely. Well, okay, good. The government is committed to protecting children from harm. Again, good. Protecting children and the vulnerable from being harmed or exploited by gambling is a core objective of the regulation of gambling in Great Britain and a priority of the government. The Gambling Commission, as the regulator for gambling in Great Britain, has powers to regulate online gambling and is committed to using its powers and expertise to contribute to creating a safer internet. Okay, that's fair enough so far. The issue, obviously, is are these loot boxes considered gambling? But let's read on and see how the government approached this. The Gambling Commission released a position paper in March 2017 detailing existing protections in relation to virtual currencies, esports, and social casino gaming, which, if you look at what they've said there, it looks to some extent like they're limiting their remit, if you like. They're limiting what they're looking at to, in effect, virtual gambling. They're not looking at loot boxes per se at the moment. They're just looking at things like esports and virtual casinos. So they're not looking at actual video games as such. They're looking at video games which are in themselves gambling or offer gambling options in the traditional sense. They're not looking at things like loot boxes because they fall outside of that remit. It seems to me. Anyway, that's the way I read this. The paper can be found on the Gambling Commission's website at the following address. I'll put a link into that. And then they go on to say, where gambling facilities are offered to British consumers using in-game items that can be converted into cash or traded for items of real-world value, then such activities must be licensed by the Gambling Commission and adhere to strict requirements for the protection of children and the vulnerable, which include measures to prevent underage gambling. It is an offence to invite a child to gamble, and where there is a failure to prevent underage gambling, the Commission will take regulatory and/or criminal action. Well, if that's the case, then they should already be looking at games like FIFA and CSGO especially, because loot boxes in FIFA can be turned into real-world money. And CSGO is rife with it. There's a whole economy grown up around it. And there are other games where this has been a pretty big issue as well. There are whole economies growing up around loot boxes. So the government and the Gambling Commission seem to be behind the curve on this. Do they not know what's going on? Well, I would probably suggest that that's precisely the case. And no, they don't really know what's going on. And there's almost a sense to me that they are willful in their ignorance, that they don't really want to know what's going on. I may be wrong in that, but I would hazard a guess that there's a lot of money that comes in terms of revenue into the exchequer from video games. And so I would expect them to be a little bit reluctant to look too closely at this. And yeah, it could be argued that these economies weren't specifically intended by the companies who create the loot boxes and the loot box systems. But come on. If you create loot boxes where you offer varying value items, you're likely going to have a system that is going to arise from that where people trade those items. And we've seen it already, as I say, in CSGO, FIFA, and many, many other games, especially in the free-to-play arena. And the Gambling Commission and the governments should be looking at these economies and whether that is something that they need to look at people like EA for, or whether it's the people setting up the economies outside of the games themselves. Something needs to be done about that immediately. And then go back and look at the actual loot crates themselves maybe as well. But something needs to be done about the economies that have already sprung up around this, that people are gambling and then they're using these items as currencies. But they go on. Where the facility exists for players of video games to purchase a key to unlock a bundle containing an unknown quantity and value of in-game items as a prize, and where there are readily accessible opportunities to cash in or exchange those awarded in-game items for money or money's worth, then these elements of the game are likely to be considered licensable gambling activities. So I go back to what I said before. They're saying here that where these are available, they are considered or should be considered licensable gambling activities. So it's already going on. We've already looked at that. We've already seen that these kind of things are growing up around FIFA and CSGO and many, many other games. But they go on. In contrast, where prizes are restricted for use solely within the game, such in-game features would not be licensable gambling. So there's their get out clause, isn't it? Because these things aren't necessarily happening within the game themselves. They're not set up by the likes of EA. They are set up by people outside of the game itself. So this is the get out clause for the government and the gambling commissions. I would think this is what they would say anyway, it seems to me. The Gambling Commission is committed to working with the video game industry. Okay. To prevent gambling-related harm related to their platforms. And what I have to say here is that this is like the medical profession working with the smoking industry to prevent harm from smoking. And we all know what happened with the smoking industry. We couldn't expect them to implement changes into the industry that would hurt their bottom line. And this is the case here as well. You can't expect the big AAA companies to implement changes to their loot boxes that are going to cause them to lose money. And when we're talking money, we're talking millions here, tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions. So they can't be trusted on this. Not because necessarily they're inherently untrustworthy. They may be, they may not be. But when there's money involved, there's a conflict of interest. So the conflict of interest here is they could be told, look, this is harming people, but then they look at how much money they're making and they're not going to want to change it. This is their industry. This is where they make their money. Look, while I understand the need to work with the video games industry to some extent, there's a pressing need for governments and the gambling commissions to, well, frankly, get their heads out their arses and start policing the industry. But as I said earlier, it's clear that the government and the Gambling Commission in the UK are frankly out of touch with what's going on. And they go on. Consumers are also protected by the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. This includes a requirement on businesses not to subject anyone to misleading or aggressive marketing practices, or, for example, directs exhortation to buy products such as games content, including in-game purchases such as loot boxes. The government is committed to ensuring that consumers are properly protected and that children's vulnerability and inexperience is not exploited by aggressive commercial practices. Really? Well, if you look at the likes of FIFA and you look at the likes of Shadow of War and many of the other games that offer microtransactions, you ask anybody who plays those games and you look at just how front and centre these loot boxes are. The first thing you see when you go into Shadow of War is options for loot boxes. They're everywhere, and this is the case with nearly all of these games. They're right up in your face from the moment you put the game in. You know, there is no sort of option to turn them off. There's no child protection option. You know, there's no parental controls to turn them off. As I said, and I've said it several times now, and I will keep saying it, the government has its head up its arse because these things are already going on. This is not something they need to look for. It's there already. Anyway, the Video Standards Council VSC rating board is the designated body for classifying video games and applies the Europe-wide PEGI ratings to video games supplied in the UK. The PEGI criteria currently make provision for games depicting simulations of traditional gambling, and such games would generally attract a minimum PEGI 12 rating. PEGI 12? Yeah, right, because, you know, kids of 12 years old really understand what they're getting into with gambling. Frankly, that beggars belief as far as I'm concerned. I would say that anything that involves gambling should be at least a PEGI 16, and frankly, I would rather see it being a PEGI 18, because I don't think gambling should be for anybody other than adults, and even then it should have certain restrictions. But that's just me, you know. Why would we worry about anyone once they've reached the age of 12? The VSC rating board is discussing these issues with the PEGI Council and its experts group to determine whether any changes to the PEGI criteria need to be made. But again, I go back and I say that what they're looking at is they're looking at simulated gambling here. They're not talking about loot boxes per se. They're talking about actual gambling being offered within games. And when I say actual gambling, I mean traditional styles of gambling. Still, they're not looking at microtransactions and loot boxes. And, you know, specifically loot boxes, because microtransactions, while they annoy me, I can kind of live with them up to a point. They don't encourage gambling. The Gambling Commission monitors the participation of children in gambling through a range of data sources, including complaints, academic research, and the annual Young People and Gambling Survey, which in 2017 included specific questions in relation to esports and video gaming. The results of the survey are due to be published soon. Well, I look forward to seeing what they have to say, but I'll make a wager for you. I bet they fudge the issue. If I was a gambling man, which I'm not, I would be happy to wager on the fact that there's not going to be any clear insight from this report. I hope I'm wrong, I really do, but I can't imagine we're going to get much joy from this. The Gambling Commission has also asked the Responsible Gambling Strategy Board to examine the wider relationship between children and gambling. Good! On October the 11th, the government published the Internet Safety Strategy, setting out plans to make the UK the safest place in the world to be online. The strategy outlines how the government will work with online platforms, games publishers and games developers, and with the agencies such as the VSC rating board to continue to improve online safety in games. This includes promoting further awareness and understanding of PEGI age ratings, parental controls, and advice on safe gaming. Well, that's all very well, but it won't mean a thing if people are aware of the PEGI rating if the games that include gambling are rated at bloody 12, will it? Are you kidding me? Look, parents may well understand that their kids can't be gambling, and they may well understand the PEGI rating. But if you set gambling in games to be allowed in games for 12-year-olds, excuse me, but you've still got the problem. As I said before, as far as I'm concerned, if you've got real gambling in games or even simulated gambling in games like loot boxes, those games should be at the very least set to rating of 16. And I would want 18, frankly, because gambling is dangerous and you don't want to be encouraging it to people who haven't developed yet. Okay, look, with adults, we get issues with adults and, some people are more prone to addiction than others. But the reality is that you will always have those people. But you're going to get more of those people if you market gambling to them when they're still 12 years old, for crying out loud. I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. Between the ages of 12 and 16, 12 and 18, it's fine to advertise gambling? Really? Come on. The government recognises the risks that come from increasing convergence between gambling and video games. The Gambling Commission is keeping this matter under review and will continue to monitor developments in the market. Well, good. And while you're monitoring these developments, virtually all the issues which you say are covered by existing rules are continuing to plague the industry. As far as I'm concerned, it's time to stop the bloody monitoring and do something. But here's another wager. This time next year, nothing will have changed. I will bet you real money. Am I allowed to do that, or am I covered by the Gambling Commission? The fact is that more and more games are going to be released that are full of microtransactions and loot boxes. They're going to keep coming, and the government will still be monitoring the situation. That's where we are. That's the situation we find ourselves in. A government that's sitting on its hands monitoring while the problem continues to get worse. So what can you guys do about it? Well, there are some things you can do about it, and the reality is that I'm a bit reluctant to do this. I don't like to say to people, go out and do this, go out and do that. So I'll say here now that this is totally up to you. This is not me saying you have to do this. And frankly, I'm just some guy on the internet. You shouldn't be listening to what I have to say. You should be making your own mind up. But if you are keen to do something about this, there are some things you can do. So make your own mind up. But if you want to do something, here's what you can do. Go and sign the petition. If you live in the UK, go and sign the petition. It's over 15,000 signatures as I record this. And we need to get it to 100,000 signatures in order for it to be debated in the House of Commons, or at least for it to stand the chance of being debated in the House of Commons. That might still not happen. But with 100,000 signatures, that does send out a very strong message. The next step is write a letter to your MP. Or go and see him or her. Or if you're not in the UK, whatever your representative is, go and see them or write them a letter, write them an email. Tell them that you're concerned about this issue and that you think we're storing up problems for the future. Because as far as I'm concerned, we are. We're storing up problems for the future. And frankly, I've said this before, I'd rather we didn't see regulation, but the fact is the industry are dragging its feet, and they will drag their feet for the next 20 years if allowed to do so. So we've already reached the stage where something needs to be done, and we need to start putting pressure on our governments to do something about this. Even if it's only for them to put pressure on the industry to do something. If we can get this changed without regulation, then so much the better. But I would make you another wager here and now. The only way these companies are going to be brought in line is with regulation. I hate that that's the case, but it's almost certainly going to be what will happen. It's the only way because there's too much money involved. But anyway, the other thing you can do is to just go and warn your family and friends. Tell them about games like Shadow of War. And okay, they're adult games. Shadow of War shouldn't be played by kids. But Star Wars, Star Wars Battlefront 2. Most people have no idea that these gambling practices are infecting video games. And they're letting their kids go and play them, thinking they're relatively safe. I mean, look, I grew up with Star Wars. And it was harmless fun. And most parents now also grew up with Star Wars, and it was harmless fun for them. And they'd play the video games, they'd watch the movies, they'd read the tie-ins and the comics and all the rest of it. And they've got no idea that something like Star Wars Battlefront 2 is coming out and it's absolutely chock full of microtransactions. I sat down the other day with my kid and he was playing a game, and the first thing I saw was loot boxes flashing up, and it was a little game on the iPad. It's out of control. So let people know. Talk to your kids about it. You know, the fact is you're not going to stop them from seeing these things. So you need to talk to them about it. Talk to them about it. Let them know what these things are, that they are kind of a form of gambling. And then warn them, you know, whatever happens, don't actually spend any money on them. That's kind of the best that you can do, I suppose, short of stopping your kids playing games at all, because this has become ubiquitous now. This is not something you can say, oh, you can play that game, but not that game, because nearly every game, certainly on things like the iPad or the iPhone or any of the Android devices, the games you find on there, they're all full of microtransactions. And okay, you can stop them paying for them, but they're still seeing the little boxes come up, and there's still that kind of push towards getting them to spend some money. And I've told my kid, no, we are not spending any money on this stuff. But that's all you can do, I suppose. Tell your friends, speak to your kids, sign the petition, please, if you feel inclined to do so, and maybe write a letter to your MP, talk to your MP, but just be vocal about it. Make sure that the companies know that we're not happy with this and we're not going to sit still for it. The government, in their statement on this, they seem to think that this is the end of the matter, that we will go away now. We need to make sure that this isn't the end of the matter, that it's just the beginning. You know, Star Wars used to be harmless fun, but not anymore. Not anymore. And video games have become a lot more dangerous for our kids and for people who are vulnerable. Anyway, that's my opinion. That's my take on the government's response. I don't know what you guys think of it. I've been going on rather a long time on this one. I just wanted to go through the whole thing and give you my opinion on it. So I hope you can indulge me a little bit on this one. Hopefully I won't have to say anything on this for the next couple of weeks. Who knows? There's probably going to be some more developments, so I might have to make another video. But in the meantime, I'm going to go and get myself a cup of tea and, try and think about something more positive, like, I don't know, playing Mario or something, or playing the new Wolfenstein game or something like that, which hasn't got microtransactions. Yes! A game that hasn't got microtransactions. Two that came out this week with no microtransactions. Fucking brilliant. All right, anyway, that's me out of here. I'll speak to you in the next one. Bye.